I want to describe some results of our research. It's on the one hand, it's finished now because we don't touch these problems in our recent works, but it's on the other hand, it's not finished because there is no any publications about it.
I hope they will come soon in our journal.
Yes, I promise from this from this high place. Our research was made from March till October 2012 with my students, my colleagues, PhD colleagues. Now we have a set of interviews. It's about 40, and we have observers online pool. It's about 1,300 respondents. It's after cleaning. But you know that problems of online research is that we can't to do some extrapolation and for all our groups. And how we recruited of our respondents. First of all, it's a basis of contacts of such organizations like Голос and Гражданин Наблюдатель, and we recruited respondents in Vkontakte and in Facebook. First of all, I want to give some periodization of events connected with observers' activity. We divided four periods of that activity. A period, it's before, during the parliament elections. B period, it's between parliament elections and before the presidential elections. C period, it's a period of regional election campaigns of first wave till it's a spring and fall of 2012. And a D period, it's a period of mixed activity. What it mean? It's an Ukrainian elections where the observers from Russia they participated in the Ukrainian elections, and it's a regional election campaign in spring of 2013, and it's a Krimsk for sure. We focused on the first of three periods, A, B, and C periods, and shortly I want to describe our typology and our analysis in motivation of civil observers. We extracted three groups of motives for participation. The first group, we called it social activity. There were three dominants. First of it, protest and negative emotionality. And that motive was very bright, and we could meet it in each interview what we made. The second, It's an active curiosity and strong personal and group identity. It's a group identity as curiosity men. We want to know how it goes on. The third, it's a gamification.
Просит паузу, секунду, чтобы камеру сменить.
Okay.
Сцену поменять.
Антураж.
Все?
Okay. And the third motive is it was gamification. What it means? It's a self-presentation in social work, in social networks. The second group of motives, we called it asking new sincerity. And a lot of topics and marks which we collected as one theme, as one point. The first of it, reactualized contradiction of law and truth. Право and правда. In
right and truth, probably. Because there is the difference between law and right? Gazettes and right.
Yeah, right and truth. The second, testing election as a formal procedure. Back them to basic functionality. The third, testing elections as a hidden procedure. To give publicity to a shadow practice or shade practices in this sphere. The fourth, emphasize ethic reactions and values, contrary to political pragmatics. It's it was one of common points of in discussions between civil observers. And the fifth, to make public facts as to make facts about Russian election campaign, and they want to be some like a member of corpus of a civic journalists. To be a civic journalist, it's our named, it's our words. But a lot of our respondents told us, I want to create some facts by my own hands. I won't believe to traditional journalists nor my friends in social networks. I want to understand, and I want to use my own eyes to understand what's happened. And the third group of motives and motivation, we called it Zeitgeist. It's to feel spirit of our time. The first point of it, it's peer involvement. The second, it's a fashion, it's a manner of thinking, and the third, it's they want fun. They want it's intention to give a full swing to their feelings, then we try to understand what's happened with all groups of motifs in dynamic before, between, and after federal elections. In the first period, it's an 8 period, we saw that a lot of our respondents involved into that practice by their curiosity. It was gloomy mobilization, and its motives to do it in spite. The second period, it's a B period between elections. There were some interesting types of thinking, ways of thinking, and types of motivation. On the one hand, a lot of civil observers were involved into the street protests, and it was some like complicity and implication. But in that time we saw that it was growing disbelief in success. Some of our respondents told us that was some like kamikaze mood. We don't believe in success, but we must participate, but we must to do it. A lot of our respondents felt a distancing from street protest in mood, not physically. For example, one man told us, "I can't find ideas and tasks for me for the future on that actions. I can't find anything which are supported me in my activity as observer." They feel I want to emphasize that they feel the distance between their activity as observers and protest movement. And the third period, the C period, after the presidential elections, most of our informants told us about some. They asked to us. They asked us one question: what's next? Our civic duty is over. What's next? And in that period, they started to discuss between them and with us too the two frame of ideas. It's a duty frame and activity frame. Duty, it's my civic duty during the elections, and activity or social activism as a frame of living. They understand that it's something different, and they try to understand what they have to do next. And the second contradiction It was a necessity of public protest against a necessity of reflections and discuss. Street protest and meetings are too activistic. One girl told us. It's impossible to talk and it's impossible to discuss some problems. What I felt. So I have a few ideas and a few conclusions. The first one. The mobilization of civil observers was some kind of splitting activity. It has grown out of professional civil activity, like style mobilization, like fashion, and new friends mobilization. The second. Spontaneous form of self-actualization and public reflections of angry town citizens. Observers discussed different and difficult subjects. They formulated problems unformulated before in traditional media and even in internet networks. And what is the most important for me, they explicate their own experience of institutional involvement, institutional practices. They converse an individual dissatisfaction of political regime to the logic of collective action. The third, there is the most interesting thing in motivation of civil observers. They intended to be some like a self-identical agent. They want to be not only an object for media or internet information. They want to create facts in order to be sure that and to find their own understanding of what's going on in elections, in political system, and so on. The fourth conclusion, it was ambivalent dynamic of mobilization between parliament and presidential elections. The number of participants involved and the number of participants increased, and on the other hand, their beliefs in success decreased. The next one, the strategy, aims and slogans of civil control, which were formulated by civil observers, like honest elections, were displaced by logic slogans and motives of street protest. And a lot of our respondents felt it, and they were abused. And the last one, that practices of observers had become a trigger for protest, and even not only a source for of ideas and slogans, it brought a frame of honest elections as a basis and scenario for logic and for public actions. And finally, discovered a fundamental contradiction between activism and different forms of civil control, between institutional logic of action and public protest movement. I think it's that's it, and now I want to talk with you. About your your own ideas and about your own experience, because I know that a lot of colleagues from a lot of my students from sociological department, they were observers. And for me it was a very difficult task to split their roles of like on the one hand they want to be civil activists and civil observers, and on the other hand, they are sociologists.
Do we have statistics of how many civil observers actually participated in the rally? Not now. Right now I haven't it. But they were many, basically.
Yeah.
Your argument, you implied that there were many observers from elections who then participated in the rallies.
Yeah.
Or you are even saying that they initiated them?
Now we are going to do the next step of our research. We want to do another online poll, and we want to compare our former data and now, and it could be more clean for us.
Questions? Natasha.
Yes, I have a question. Thank you for the presentation. You said that the movement of observers was a fashion and new friends or new flames mobilization?
I told that it was some like a fashion mobilization, because between elections that motive was very strong. It's around me it was a lot of my friends, they involved, and I want to do the same. That's why I think that I couldn't say that it was social movement. I think that it was to the second stage of social observers mobilization. It was a fashion mobilization. They want to be civil observers because of.
And why this type of participation became a fashion?
Became a fashion?
Yes. It was not fashionable before.
It's a difficult question for me. I guess, but I don't know. I have some ideas about it. For example, social networks created some atmosphere among involved person, and it was a sudden effect for a sudden idea for many civil observers of B period. For those who involved in that practice after the first elections, after the Duma's elections, and once I discussed with my colleagues that it was some like a tribal behavior, but it's not really that, but it looks like it. Fashion like a motive, it's a very strong argument. I understand that I have to find more data to base it.
I think responding to Natasha, the explanation is very simple. You know, fashion always starts in Paris and New York. That's what happens. Fashion is global. Yes.
Yeah, I have a short comment on the question. Well, I think that many observers were somehow very core for this events during the 2011-2012. They were witness. They had evidences for the elections. They share links on the internet. They try to persuade people while on the public rallies. And my question is, what have you found? Did you try to persuade others, and what were the tactics?
About the tactics?
Tactics about delivering the message of why these elections were wrong.
Why exactly these elections?
Yeah.
Not the elections before.
I mean, in December, parliamentary presidential. How did you try to persuade others how did you try to bring evidences?
Окей. Какие у них были аргументы за то, что действительно фальшивый выбор? Аргументация.
The argument was, I want to watch it by my own eyes. It's the main argument. A lot of our respondents, they couldn't catch some cheaters by their own hands. But the most strong argument, the strong motive, I want to be there. I want to watch it by my own eyes.
I just have one or two suggestions based on my own research on this. So first of all, I think you should look even more carefully at the link between the observer movement, especially in the run-up to the Duma election, and the movement for municipal self-governance. Because what I found, especially in my case study in Chelyabinsk, was that a lot of the people who organized this observer movement have very long-standing roots in this movement, which is not exclusively urban. It even concerns villages. For greater municipal self-governance, and even Kurs, for example, which is the most prominent nationwide organization in that field, was actually co-founded 10 years ago by people who had been active in that field and who had also created associations for municipal self-governments.
Also municipal deputies.
Exactly, yeah. So both on a regional and on a nationwide level. So I think there was a very strong connection there, which is very interesting to study because very often the people who were involved in organizing this movement weren't then involved in the mass demonstrations. They were surprised by the mass demonstrations, and it was extremely important for them to remain neutral. Because they were saying that the most professionalized domestic observers were saying, this is not our job, this is not what we were aiming for. We're somewhat surprised by the fact that some of these observers that we organized and trained at our seminars are now at the core of these demonstrations. And it's not our job to go there because we want to remain neutral. So that's one point. And the other point is that I think, especially in an international setting, it might be useful to refer to these people not as civil observers, but as domestic observers. Because I think that the most important contrast is not between civil observers and observers from state bodies, etc., but it's between domestic, locally self-organized observers and international observers. This is something that I write in my book. Even 10 years ago, what we saw in most countries around the world whose democratization is considered questionable is that election observers were mainly sent there and organized by international bodies, which meant that they had very, very limited legitimacy. Because very often they didn't really know the situation in the country, they had their own political agendas in terms of supporting it. We saw this literally last week in Azerbaijan. There were 40 organizations there, only one was bold enough to mention what was going on there, because everybody else, all the other organizations were staffed with diplomats who are friendly or even paid by the Azerbaijani government. Right?
You're quite right, yes.
Yeah, so what we've been seeing in the past 10 or 15 years is a vast worldwide movement, which is not very visible in Western Europe and North America, but everywhere else, Africa, Latin America, Asia, post-communist world, of domestic observers, which are now organized in international organizations, networks, etc. And in the book I mentioned a comparison between Russia and Senegal, because the elections there happened at exactly the same time. And in both countries, there was a very strong movement of self-organized domestic observers. Only in Senegal, that movement actually contributed to the change of government, and Russia didn't. But I think that's the really interesting contrast. It's not a contrast between civil observers and state observers or observers set by political parties, which is important for the internal Russian debate. But what's really important is the contrast between domestic observers and international ones.
Yeah, thank you.
I want to add that this argument about the observers, which I like very much, it has to do with what I said about populism. Because populism is usually seen as manipulative, rhetorical. But in this case, these people tend to objectify themselves and to see themselves as the objects of manipulation in a sense. Like when Navalny explained why he goes to the Russian march, he says, well, nationalists, they are an objective part of our society, so we have to support them. What's the logic? So it's the constant process of objectification of social forces and of self-objectification. So as you are saying, they are like these Brechtian actors. They always split into two. It's very interesting. There is this cynical moment, but at the same time, it's not just Machiavellian cynicism. It's somehow very sincere cynicism.
Thank you.